Have you ever been mocked as the protagonist who, after being mocked by her husband Paul for being jobless, reveals her secret identity as the CEO of his company? Using her position, she exposes Paul's corruption and that of his friends, uncovering years of harassment, fraud, and abuse of power. This revelation leads to their downfall, destroying their reputations and careers. Rather than seeking revenge alone, the protagonist focuses on transforming the company into an inclusive and collaborative environment. Under her leadership, silenced employees rise to prominence, innovation thrives, and harassment becomes a thing of the past. The story concludes with the protagonist embracing her leadership role, proving that true success comes from fostering growth and positive change, not just defeating adversaries. Before we dive into this story, please don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share this story with others. He mocked me in front of his friends for not having a job. Little did they know I owned the company they all worked for until I fired them. I stayed silent through another evening of their cruel jokes. Can't even land an entry-level position, my husband, Paul, laughed, clinking glasses with his colleagues. The irony was delicious. I had hired the firm that had recruited each of them. Tomorrow, that same firm would help me clean house. I held a crystal glass in my hand, the cool surface grounding me as I observed them from across our marble-floored living room. 5 men in tailored suits, all senior executives of my company, handpicked by me through layers of shell companies and discreet hiring firms. At the center of it all was Paul, my husband of 8 years, their VP of operations, leading the chorus of mockery. Remember when she tried interviewing at Globals? Paul quipped, loosening his tie. God, I wish I could have seen that train wreck. If only he knew, that so-called interview had been one of my quarterly inspections of middle management, carefully orchestrated through my labyrinth of holding companies. I had built Global Company from the ground up 12 years ago, long before I even met Paul. The company was my first love, my redemption after watching my father's small business crumble under corporate raiders. At least she's persistent, chuckled one of the men. How many rejections this month? Paul sneered, reaching for the 30-year-old scotch I had bought. My scotch. Everything in this house, the art on the walls, the imported furniture, even the fancy watch on his wrist, was paid for by the company he believed had rejected me. I took another sip of water, masking my emotions with a practiced air of quiet humiliation. It was the same mask I had worn when I first met Paul at a charity gala. Back then, I'd already learned the hard way that success attracted opportunists. 3 failed relationships with men who saw me as a ticket to luxury had taught me to be cautious. So when I met Paul, I decided to experiment. I presented myself as a struggling freelance consultant, driving a modest car and living in a small apartment. Paul seemed different at first, supportive even. You'll find your place, he'd said in those early days. Just keep trying. But once we married and he moved into what he thought was our house, his true nature began to emerge. Hey, honey, Paul called out now, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Maybe you should try the coffee shop down the street. I hear they're hiring baristas. More laughter followed. I forced a weak smile, perfectly playing my role. Inside, I was reviewing the documentation my private investigators had compiled over the past year. Unofficial meetings with competitors, inflated expense reports, and steady leaks of company information that always seemed to benefit Paul's personal stock portfolio. I think I'll head upstairs, I said softly, playing the part of the defeated wife. Big day tomorrow, another interview. Don't wait up, sweetie, Paul called after me. We're celebrating Nick's promotion. Might be a late one. Nick, my latest plant in senior management, would be documenting their drunken conversations tonight, adding to the pile of evidence we'd been gathering. In my private study, I locked the door and settled behind my desk. A hidden wall panel slid open silently, revealing my secure workspace. 3 monitors came to life, displaying Global Company's real-time operations across the globe, a small empire built through years of careful strategy and ironclad NDAs. A message buzzed on my phone from Mercy, my most trusted executive and one of the few who knew my true identity. Final documentation in place. Board members briefed. Tomorrow's meeting confirmed. I smiled, thinking of the carefully orchestrated revelation to come. The board had always known me as Alex Chin, the reclusive founder who communicated through encrypted video calls. Tomorrow, they would meet their CEO in person for the first time, not as a mysterious figure behind the screen, but as Paul's unemployable wife. On my desk were the termination papers for Paul and his cronies, each backed by months of evidence. The sound of breaking glass echoed from downstairs, followed by raucous laughter. Their careless disrespect for my home added yet another infraction to the documentation: inappropriate use of company property for personal entertainment. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought of my father's words. Success isn't about who is the loudest voice in the room. It's about having the wisdom to wait, watch, and act at the perfect moment. That moment had finally arrived. Morning came with precision. I woke early, watching Paul struggle with his hangover as he rushed to prepare for what he believed would be a normal day at the office. By 6:30 a.m., I was already at Global Company, entering through the service entrance in a plain navy suit, a stark contrast to my usual designer wardrobe. Mercy greeted me in the basement security office, handing me a visitor's badge. "Everything's in place," she murmured. The interview was set for 9 a.m., coinciding with Paul's team's regular morning meeting. Nick would keep them occupied while I observed operations firsthand. Disguised as an eager interview candidate, I sat in the lobby, blending into the background as executives streamed in, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Paul walked past me at 8:45 without even noticing. By the time he and his team realized the truth, it would be far too late. Today was the day everything would change. While employees nodded politely at the woman they assumed was just another hopeful candidate, Thomas led me through the open office layout I had designed years ago. "We'll start with a brief skills assessment," he explained, his tone carrying the subtle condescension reserved for candidates they had already decided not to hire. "Then we'll move on to a panel interview with some of our team leaders." The skills assessment was almost insulting in its simplicity, basic coding problems I could solve in my sleep. I deliberately made small mistakes, playing the role of the nervous applicant. Through the glass walls, I could see Paul and his cohorts in their morning meeting, laughing about something, probably another candidate they had decided to toy with. "Well," Thomas said, reviewing my intentionally flawed work. "This is interesting." His pause spoke volumes. "Let's move on to the panel interview." The conference room overlooked the city, a view I usually enjoyed from my private office 24 floors above. 3 middle managers waited inside, all wearing expressions of bored superiority. I recognized each face from their personnel files. I knew their salaries, performances, and secrets. "So, Miss Jude," the first interviewer began, not even bothering to introduce himself. "I see you've been between positions for some time." "Yes," I replied softly, adding a slight tremor to my voice. "It's been challenging in this market." "And what makes you think you're qualified for a position at Global Company?" the second interviewer asked, barely looking up from his phone. I launched into the carefully crafted story we'd prepared, a mix of genuine qualifications masked by apparent desperation. With each response, I watched them grow more dismissive. They had already decided my fate, just as they had done to countless other qualified candidates who didn't fit their preconceptions. Through the glass walls, I saw Paul passing by. He did a double take, then smirked and pulled out his phone. Moments later, the interviewers' phones buzzed simultaneously. I didn't need to see their screens to know he was messaging them about his wife's latest, embarrassing attempt at employment. The rest of the interview became a masterclass in corporate cruelty, subtle jabs, exchanged glances, and barely concealed yawns. I documented every microaggression, every breach of our HR policies, while maintaining my facade of nervous optimism. "Thank you for your time," Thomas said finally, his tone making it clear there would be no second interview. "We'll be in touch." As I walked toward the elevator, I heard Paul's voice around the corner. "No way that was your wife, man," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "She really is desperate. Did you see her suit? Probably from Target." I kept walking, letting their laughter fuel what was to come. In my purse, my real phone buzzed with messages from Mercy. Board members were arriving early, the legal team was standing by, and security was ready to escort. The final act of my charade was about to begin. I ducked into a restroom and entered the last stall, where Mercy had hidden a garment bag earlier that morning. Inside was my true armor, a meticulously tailored Chanel suit, Louboutin heels, and the CEO's security badge I had never worn in public. As I transformed from Angela Jude, failed job candidate, to Alex Chin, CEO of global company, their mocking laughter echoed in my mind. In 30 minutes, I would walk into the boardroom, not as a supplicant, but as their ultimate superior. I stepped out of the restroom as Alex Chin for the first time in my own building, watching employees' eyes widen as they struggled to reconcile the confident executive before them with the nervous interviewee from moments ago. Let them stare. The real show was about to begin. The click of my Louboutins against the marble floor announced each step toward the executive floor. Employees scrambled to clear my path, their confusion palpable as they tried to place my familiar yet transformed face. Whispers started immediately, spreading like wildfire through the building's messaging systems. I took the private elevator, the one Paul had always wondered about, installed for the Phantom CEO's exclusive use. As I ascended, Mercy's text confirmed everything was in place. Board members were seated, Paul's team was still in their morning briefing, and security was standing by. The elevator opened directly into the boardroom's antechamber. Through the frosted glass, I saw the silhouettes of the board members, all aware of what was about to unfold. But first, I had a different meeting to attend. I turned left toward the executive conference room, where Paul and his inner circle were celebrating their latest victories. Standing in the hallway shadows, I could hear their voices clearly through the door, left carelessly ajar. "You should have seen her face during the interview," Paul said smugly. "My own wife, thinking she could actually land a position here. What's next? Trying to become CEOs?" Raucous laughter followed. It was time. I stepped into the doorway, casting a shadow across their morning coffees. The laughter died instantly. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying the authority of 12 years of leadership, "I think I'll deliver that news myself." The shock on their faces was everything I had imagined. Paul's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth, his face draining of color as he struggled to reconcile his wife's presence with the aura of absolute authority I now projected. What are you doing here?" he stammered. "And dressed like the CEO of global company," I finished smoothly. "Exactly like that." As security escorted Paul and his cohorts from the building, I retreated to my private office, the elusive top-floor suite that had fueled so many rumors. Mercy followed close behind, tablet in hand, ready to execute the next phase of our plan. "Their access has been revoked," she reported, swiping through the security protocols. "IT is freezing their accounts and backing up all data. Legal has already sent cease and desist orders to prevent any retaliation attempts." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching as Paul and his friends were escorted to their cars below. Even from 20 stories up, their shock was unmistakable, visible in their stumbling steps and defeated posture. "What about the house?" I asked, thinking of the home Paul believed he'd helped pay for. "The security team is already there, changing the locks. Your personal items have been moved to the penthouse as planned," Mercy replied. "As for Paul's things," she paused, allowing herself a small smile, "they'll be delivered to his mother's house by this evening." I nodded, recalling how Paul had often boasted to his mother about supporting me through my career struggles. The irony wouldn't be lost on her. "And the divorce papers?" "Being filed as we speak. The prenup you had him sign is ironclad. He thought it protected his assets, never realizing it gave him no claim to yours." A notification popped up on my private screen. Paul was already trying damage control, posting on professional networks about strategic differences with global companies' management. I watched as Sarah's team swiftly countered with a carefully worded press release, detailing the company's zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment and discrimination. His LinkedIn profile still lists him as VP of Operations, I noted. "Not anymore," Sarah said, her fingers flying across her tablet. I sat down at my desk, my real desk, not the hidden one at home, and began reviewing the contingency plans we'd prepared. Paul and his friends weren't stupid. Wounded pride would soon give way to anger and retaliation attempts. Their non-competes are already active, Mercy added. They won't be working in this industry for at least 3 years. And we've notified all major competitors about the circumstances of their termination. No reputable company will touch them. I pulled up the security footage from their exit interviews. Paul was still in denial, threatening to expose me. Kingdom had broken down in tears upon realizing his stock options were worthless. The others alternated between begging and threatening. What about their projects? I asked. And to the Atlas Tech Board. Let's see how quickly they distance themselves. Nick has already assembled transition teams. No critical operations will be affected, Mercy replied. Though I suggest we audit everything they've touched in the last year. Make it 3 years, I said, recalling snippets of drunken conversations about creative accounting. Mercy nodded. And their client interactions? Flag all of them, I said. My phone buzzed. Paul, using his personal number. I declined the call and added him to the growing list of blocked contacts. His friends were trying too, likely hoping to negotiate some kind of settlement. Should we issue a company-wide statement? Mercy asked. I considered the ripple effects already moving through the building. By now, everyone would know that their mysterious CEO was Paul's supposedly unemployable wife. The story was undoubtedly spreading through every department, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Schedule an all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning, I decided. It's time they met their real CEO, not the caricature Paul created. A subtle alert flashed on my screen. Paul had arrived at his mother's house. The security feed showed him standing amidst boxes of his belongings, his mother's expression shifting from confusion to horror as he explained the morning's events. His company car? I asked. Still in our parking lot, Mercy replied. Security is waiting to retrieve it. I nodded, turning to the stack of documents requiring immediate attention. Organizational charts needed updating, responsibilities reassigned, and damage control initiated with our major clients. One more thing, Mercy added, her tone softening slightly. The charity gala next month. The one where you met Paul? Cancel my RSVP, I interrupted. But double the company's donation anonymously? The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and strategic planning. By evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Mercy brought me one final report. They're all serving their garden leave at home. Security is monitoring their communications. No unusual activity yet. They're in shock, I finished for her. Give them a day. Then the real reactions will begin. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of the day. In less than 12 hours, I had shed a false identity, ended a marriage, fired 5 executives, and stepped into the public eye as CEO. Was it worth it? Mercy asked quietly, breaking protocol for a moment of honesty. I thought about the years of subtle humiliation, of watching Paul and his friends crush other people's dreams for sport, of witnessing their casual cruelty to anyone they deemed beneath them. Ask me again in a week, I replied, turning back to my monitors. There was still work to be done, a company to rebuild, and a legacy to cement. Revenge wasn't about one dramatic moment. It was about ensuring they never recovered enough to hurt anyone else again. Paul called again, Mercy reported between meetings, this time from a burner phone. He's demanding a private meeting. Document it with legal, I replied, scanning the notes from my last meeting. And check his mother's social media. She usually telegraphs his next move. By late afternoon, the corporate chessboard had shifted dramatically. 3 of Paul's most loyal managers had resigned rather than adapt to the new regime. 2 others had provided valuable information about past misconduct in exchange for amnesty. The Thompsons called, Mercy announced, entering my office. They want to meet the real CEO. I smiled, remembering Paul's mockery of my suggestions for their account. Schedule it for tomorrow, and send them the presentation I prepared, the one Paul rejected last month. A notification popped up on my screen. Paul had been spotted at a bar with Kingdom and 2 other former executives. Our surveillance team monitored their conversation. They're plotting something, Mercy observed. Of course they are, I replied, pulling up contingency plans we had prepared months ago. Let them plot. Every move they make just gives us more ammunition. I turned to the window, watching the sunset paint the city skyline. Somewhere out there, 5 angry men were discovering just how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered. Their game had ended yesterday. Mine was just beginning. Tomorrow, I told Mercy, we start phase 2. Let's see how they handle being the ones looking for jobs. After all, in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. And I've been playing this game long before they even knew they were pieces. Dawn found me reviewing surveillance footage from the bar where Paul and his cohorts had gathered. Their angry conversations, fueled by expensive scotch, provided exactly the evidence we needed to strengthen our legal position. They're planning to sue, Mercy announced, entering with 2 coffee cups. Paul contacted 3 law firms this morning. I accepted the coffee, hiding a smile. Show me. Mercy pulled up the morning's surveillance report. Paul had indeed been busy, but each firm he contacted was already subtly connected to Reynolds' company through various shell companies. Any attempts to retain them would hit an immediate conflict of interest wall. He's also been reaching out to our major clients, Mercy continued, particularly the Thompsons. Forward me the recordings. The audio files played through my private speakers. Paul's voice still carried that tilted confidence as he tried to convince our clients he'd been wrongfully terminated, that his wife had manipulated her way into power, and that the company was in danger under my leadership. Mr. Thompson's response? I asked, though I could guess. Mercy played the next clip. Thompson's voice was cold. Paul, your wife's proposal last week was brilliant. The one you dismissed. Yeah, we found out about that. Don't contact us again. I pulled up our evidence database. For over a year, we'd been building an airtight case against Paul and his inner circle. Every harassment incident, every discriminatory comment, every abuse of power, all meticulously documented. The board wants an update, Mercy noted. They're concerned about potential blowback. Schedule a meeting for this afternoon, I said, and bring me everything from the last 3 years. Emails, meeting recordings, expense reports. It's time to show them exactly why this house cleaning was necessary. The morning unfolded in a series of strategic moves. While Paul and his friends burned through their savings on legal consultations, we systematically fortified our position. HR provided a thick file of complaints that had been buried under previous management. IT extracted emails that had been accidentally deleted. Former employees reached out, offering testimonies about the toxic culture they'd fled. Paul's mother is escalating her social media campaign, Mercy reported. She's claiming you seduced him as part of a long-term corporate takeover plan. I laughed, pulling up the prenuptial agreement Paul had insisted upon. Send her lawyers a copy of this, the one her son demanded to protect his assets from his gold-digging wife. By midday, our legal team had compiled a devastating brief. Every instance of Paul bragging about manipulating stock options, every recorded conversation about sidelining qualified female candidates, every documented abuse of company resources, all presented in damning detail. Mercy rushed into my office after lunch. The surveillance team picked up something interesting. They met with someone from Atlas Tech last night. I pulled up the footage. Through high-end microphones, Paul could be heard offering to reveal company secrets in exchange for executive positions for himself and his friends. Send copies to their lawyers, I instructed. The afternoon board meeting was a masterclass in corporate strategy. One by one, I presented evidence of why each terminated executive had to go. The board's concerns melted as they realized the extent of the corruption we'd excised. There's more, I announced, pulling up financial records. We've traced irregular payments through their expense accounts. The SEC would be very interested in some of these transactions. Mercy interrupted. Paul is on his way up. He's somehow convinced lobby security to let him in. I smiled, pulling up the lobby camera feed. No, I convinced security to let him in. Watch. On the screen, Paul stormed through the lobby, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. He clutched a folder, undoubtedly containing what he thought was damaging information. Should I have security stop him? Mercy asked. Not yet. Let's see what he thinks he has. Minutes later, Paul burst into the boardroom, his triumphant expression faltering as he saw me calmly seated at the head of the table. "I have proof," he announced, waving his folder. "Proof that she orchestrated this whole thing." "You mean proof that I founded this company, built it from nothing, and ran it successfully while you took credit for my strategies?" I stood slowly. "Or proof that I documented your misconduct for years while you mocked my supposed unemployment?" The board watched silently as Paul's confidence crumbled. "You trapped me," he stammered. "No, Paul. You trapped yourself," I replied. "Every time you belittled a candidate, every time you pushed aside a qualified woman, every time you laughed about your unemployed wife, you built this case against yourself." I nodded to Mercy, who displayed our complete evidence file on the room screens. Paul watched in horror as years of his misconduct played out in high definition. "Your choices are simple," I continued. "Leave now, respect the non-compete agreement, and keep whatever dignity you have left. Or fight, and watch as every detail of your behavior becomes public record." "You can't," he began. "Security," I interrupted, pressing a button on my desk. "Please escort Mr. Morrison out, and this time revoke his lobby access." As security led him away, I turned back to the board. "Now, about those irregular financial transactions." I pulled up our contingency plans. It was time to activate Protocol Thunder. This was the culmination of months of meticulous preparation, a series of strategic moves designed to trap Paul and his cohorts in their own web of deception. The first phase began immediately. I instructed, leak the merger investigation to the financial press. Make it seem like it came from a concerned former employee. Within hours, the story was circulating on business news networks. Global Technologies stock dipped slightly, exactly as planned. Paul and his friends, already paranoid about their investments, were quick to act. "They're panicking," Mercy reported, monitoring their phone calls. All 5 of them were simultaneously calling their brokers. I watched the trading monitors as they scrambled to sell off their shares, desperately trying to stay ahead of what they thought was coming. Each sale only dug them deeper into legal jeopardy. "Release Phase 2, I instructed. The company-wide announcement went out, proclaiming a major restructuring and expansion. Our stock price surged, but Paul and his friends had already sold their shares at a loss, a clear case of market manipulation based on insider information. "Mr. Thompson from the Antitrust Commission is on the line," Mercy announced. I answered on speakerphone. "Isaac Chin, Miss Chin. We've received some very interesting information about last year's merger." "Yes, we've been conducting an internal investigation. I'd be happy to share our findings, including some rather illuminating surveillance footage from a bar last night." By midday, the SEC had launched a formal investigation into Paul and his group's trading activities, while the Antitrust Commission reviewed the merger. Meanwhile, our stock price continued to soar as the market reacted positively to the restructuring news. "Paul's trying to leave the country," Mercy reported, checking her surveillance feeds. "His passport's been flagged at the airport." I allowed myself a small smile. "How unfortunate." "The others," Mercy continued. "Kingdom's having a breakdown in his broker's office. 2 more are meeting with criminal defense lawyers. The last one is trying to delete his email history, not realizing we already have everything." The afternoon saw even more developments. Our anonymous tips had triggered investigations at 3 other companies where Paul and his team had worked previously. Former colleagues, sensing an opportunity, began coming forward with their own stories of misconduct. Their lawyers were now requesting meetings. "Decline," I replied. "Let them sweat." By evening, the perfect storm was in full swing. The SEC investigation now included their personal trading accounts. The Antitrust Commission had frozen their assets pending review. 3 separate class action lawsuits had been filed by former employees alleging systemic discrimination. "Paul's mother has gone quiet on social media," Mercy noted with satisfaction. "She probably saw the insider trading allegations." "Even she can't spin that," I replied. A notification popped up on my screen. Paul was trying to access his frozen accounts, growing increasingly desperate as each transaction was declined. "Should we release the bar footage to the media?" Mercy asked. "Not yet," I said, walking to the window. "Let's see how they handle tomorrow first." Tomorrow would bring the final phase of Protocol Thunder. While Paul and his colleagues were distracted by investigations and frozen assets, we had quietly been buying up their dumped shares through shell companies. When the market opened, Global Company would announce a major government contract, one we'd been secretly negotiating for months. Their wives are calling divorce lawyers, Mercy reported, checking her tablet one last time for the day. Apparently, they're not happy about potentially losing everything due to their husband's fraud. I thought of the prenuptial agreement Paul had insisted on, thinking it would protect him from a gold-digging wife. How ironic that it would now shield my assets from his impending legal troubles. Send them all meeting invitations for tomorrow morning, I instructed. 9 a.m. sharp. They won't come, Mercy predicted. Oh, they will. I turned from the window, my reflection hard and clear in the darkening glass. Right now, I'm their only hope of survival. As night fell over the city, I reviewed the script one final time. In less than 12 hours, Paul and his colleagues would be sitting in my office, broken and desperate, while I presented them with their options: total destruction or complete humiliation. Security badges are ready, Mercy said, placing 5 visitor passes on my desk. I picked one up, running my thumb over Paul's photo. Tomorrow, at 9 a.m. sharp, they arrived, Paul and his former colleagues, shadows of their former arrogant selves. Their expensive suits were wrinkled, their faces haggard from sleepless nights and mounting pressure. Gentlemen, I greeted them from behind my desk. I believe you've all had an interesting week. Paul couldn't meet my eyes. Kingdom was visibly trembling, while the others stared at their visitor badges as though they couldn't believe how far they'd fallen. The board is waiting, I announced, standing. Shall we? They followed me like condemned men into the executive boardroom. Through the glass walls, they could see the full board of directors seated at the massive table, along with our legal team and several SEC representatives. Before we began, I paused at the door. I want you to understand something. What happens in the next hour will determine not just your professional futures, but your personal freedom. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. Mercy stood at the presentation screen, ready to begin. The SEC representatives had their notebooks open, pens poised. Members of the board, distinguished guests, I began, taking my place at the head of the table. We're here today to address several serious matters concerning corporate governance, financial misconduct, and systemic abuse of power. With a nod to Mercy, the presentation began. Evidence of their misdeeds played out in devastating detail: trading records, surveillance footage, email chains, recorded conversations, a complete catalog of their destruction. As you can see, I continued, as Paul sank lower in his chair, the pattern of misconduct extends far beyond simple workplace harassment. We're looking at securities fraud, insider trading, and criminal conspiracy. The SEC representatives took rapid notes, while the board members' faces turned to stone. Kingdom looked ready to faint. However, I paused, letting the tension build. Global Company is prepared to offer a limited amnesty agreement, I said. One time, one offer. No negotiations. That got their attention. 5 heads snapped up, suspicion in their eyes. Mercy distributed thick document folders to each of them. The terms are simple, I explained. Full cooperation with all investigations. Complete disclosure of all misconduct, whether previously discovered or not. Return of all profits from irregular trading activities. And most importantly, a public acknowledgement of your actions. You want us to confess? Paul found his voice, though it cracked on the last word. I want you to face the consequences of your choices, I corrected him. Sign these agreements now, and Global Company will not press criminal charges. Refuse, and the SEC has enough evidence to ensure you all spend considerable time in federal prison. The board members watched impassively as the 5 men frantically flipped through their documents. Their lawyers, seated behind them, were already nodding grimly. You have 5 minutes to decide, I said, checking my watch. After that, this offer expires, and we proceed with full prosecution. The next few minutes were filled with desperate whispers. I could see the exact moment each one broke, their signatures appearing on the documents one by one. Paul was last, his hand trembling as he scrolled his name. Our eyes met as he pushed the folder across the table. In his eyes, I saw the final death of his arrogance, the complete understanding of how thoroughly he'd been outplayed. "Excellent," I said, collecting the signed documents. "Mercy will now escort you to individual conference rooms, where you'll begin your depositions with the SEC representatives." As they were led away, I turned to the board. "Now, let's discuss the future of Global Company." The next hour was spent outlining our path forward, new corporate governance structures, enhanced compliance protocols, and a complete restructuring of the executive team. The board, having witnessed the precision with which I'd handled the crisis, approved every proposal unanimously. "One last thing," I added, as the meeting drew to a close. "I want on record that every employee affected by the previous management's discrimination will be reviewed for reinstatement or compensation." The board's approval was immediate. After all, it was a small price to pay to avoid the publicity nightmare we'd saved them from. Later, in my office, Mercy brought me the preliminary depositions. "They're singing like canaries," she reported, each trying to save himself by incriminating the others. I scanned the documents, noting how quickly they turned on each other. "Make sure their confessions are properly recorded and witnessed. We don't want any retractions later." Through my window, I saw Paul being escorted to his car, his career and reputation in tatters. His lawyer was already on the phone, presumably trying to salvage what he could from the wreckage of his client's life. "And their trading records?" I asked. "Being combed through by the SEC," Mercy replied. "It was over, and our victory was complete." Forensic accountants' initial estimates suggested they would each have to repay several million in irregular gains. I nodded, turning back to my desk. The company stock was up 15% on news of the governance changes. The business papers were already heralding Global Company as a model of corporate accountability. "Schedule a company-wide meeting for tomorrow," I instructed. "It's time to rebuild what they tried to destroy." Mercy paused at the door. "Was it worth it?" I thought about years of watching them crush dreams, bully subordinates, and mock anyone they deemed inferior. About all the careers they derailed and lives they'd impacted. "Ask the people who get their jobs back," I replied. "Ask the women who won't have to face harassment. Ask everyone who believed they'd never face justice." After all, the best revenge isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring positive change for those left behind. The days following the board meeting unfolded like a carefully orchestrated domino effect. Each morning brought new revelations, each afternoon, new consequences, and each evening, new victories. Paul's criminal defense lawyer quit. Apparently, he tried to recant parts of his confession, Mercy announced as she entered my office with the morning briefing. I pulled up the surveillance feed from his deposition room. "Send them the video of his voluntary confession and the one where his lawyer advised him of his rights 3 separate times." The fallout spread beyond our corporate walls. 3 other companies had launched internal investigations after discovering similar patterns of misconduct from Paul and his friends during previous employments. Their professional networks were crumbling as former allies rushed to distance themselves. "Kingdom attempted suicide," Mercy reported quietly, placing a news clipping on my desk. "Is he stable?" "Yes, under psychiatric observation," I replied, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "Make sure his medical bills are covered anonymously and have HR fast-track the reviews of anyone he harassed or discriminated against." The media was having a field day. Business journals were running in-depth exposés on toxic corporate culture. Women's magazines wanted interviews about breaking the glass ceiling. Tech blogs were analyzing how the Phantom CEO had orchestrated such a perfect takedown. "Paul's mother gave an interview," Mercy said, pulling up the video. I watched as the woman who had once boasted about her successful son now tearfully apologized for enabling his behavior. The interview ended with her announcing a donation to workplace harassment prevention programs. His wife filed for divorce this morning, along with the wives of 3 others. They were all claiming they had no knowledge of the financial fraud. I turned to the window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, Paul was probably sitting in his mother's guest room, watching his world implode. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed, his marriage over, his future a maze of legal proceedings. "The reinstatement interviews are going well," Mercy continued, changing topics. 12 former employees have already accepted offers to return. Among them is Jennifer Chin, no relation, a brilliant programmer Paul had driven out 2 years ago. She's now heading our new AI division. Her expertise is finally recognized and valued. The Thompson account doubled their contract with us. They're impressed with our new leadership and transparency initiatives. A notification popped up on my screen. Another former employee had gone public with their story. This time, it was someone from Paul's previous company, describing a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. The SEC investigation is expanding, Mercy reported. They're looking into every company they've ever worked for. I pulled up our secure database, reviewing the evidence we had gathered. Send the investigators everything we have, every document, every recording, every trace of misconduct. The professional fallout was just the beginning. Social consequences were proving equally devastating. Country club memberships revoked, board positions at charities resigned, and private school admissions for their children suddenly waitlisted. They're being blackballed from every executive position on the East Coast, Mercy noted, scrolling through her tablet. The whistleblower websites are full of stories about them. I reviewed the latest photos from our surveillance team. Paul seemed unshaven and disheveled, trying to meet with former colleagues who suddenly had urgent appointments elsewhere. Kingdom was leaving his psychiatrist's office, haunted and hollow. The others each dealing with their downfall in their own desperate ways. Nick sent his final report, Mercy added. The transition team has completely restructured their former departments. Productivity is up 40%. It wasn't just about numbers. The office atmosphere had transformed. Without the toxic influence of Paul and his friends, employees were flourishing. Innovation was rising, collaboration improving, and the fear that had permeated certain departments was dissipating. Their legal teams are requesting another meeting, Mercy said. They want to discuss additional cooperation in exchange for lighter penalties. Too late. I turned back to my desk. They had their chance at amnesty. Actions have consequences. A message flashed on my screen. Paul was attempting to contact me through a new email account. Like all his previous attempts, it was automatically archived for the legal team and blocked. His personal belongings? I asked. Still in storage. His mother's house is apparently too small for his essential collection of luxury items. I thought about the way he used to mock people for shopping at department stores, for driving modest cars, for living within normal means. Now he was learning the true value of things and the cost of arrogance. The class action lawsuit is proceeding, Mercy updated. 300 former employees have joined. Each day brought new stories, careers derailed, opportunities denied, lives impacted by their systematic discrimination and abuse of power. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about accountability and acknowledgement. And the press? Still requesting interviews. They were particularly interested in how I maintained the phantom CEO persona while being married to Paul. I shook my head. That story will stay private. A reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. Schedule the follow-up board meeting for next week, I instructed. It's time to implement phase 2 of our corporate restructuring. As Mercy left, I reviewed the latest surveillance photos one last time. 5 men, once so powerful and arrogant, now reduced to shadows of their former selves. Their fall from grace wasn't just professional, it was complete and irreversible. After all, the true fallout of revenge isn't just in the initial explosion. It's in the radioactive aftermath that ensures nothing can ever grow in its place. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months had passed since the day I revealed myself as Global Technology CEO. Standing at my office window, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the corporate plaza, I reflected on how completely the landscape had changed. The final numbers are in, Mercy said, entering with her tablet. Quarterly profits are up 60%, Employee satisfaction is at record highs, and the class action settlement was approved this morning. I nodded, turning from the window. The settlement would ensure that everyone harmed by Paul and his cohorts received proper compensation. More importantly, it had forced a public acknowledgement of their actions and our former executives. Paul is working as a junior sales associate at a small electronics store in Ohio, Mercy continued. His mother's influence got him the job, but he's already on probation for attitude issues. The mighty had fallen indeed, I mused. The man who once mocked others' careers was now struggling to meet basic sales quotas. Kingdom was still in therapy, but doing better. He had published an online apology and was working with workplace harassment prevention groups. It seemed genuine. I picked up a framed magazine cover from my desk, last month's Business Week featuring global companies' transformation. The article praised our new corporate culture without ever mentioning the scandal that prompted it. The others? Once teaching business classes at a community college, focusing on corporate ethics. Ironically, another was working at his brother-in-law's construction company. The last one moved to Alaska to find himself. Their falls had been spectacular, but that wasn't what I thought about most. Instead, I focused on the changes their departure had enabled. Jennifer's AI division had 3 new patents filed this quarter, and the team she rebuilt was revolutionizing our entire approach to software development. Throughout the company, similar transformations had occurred. Departments once ruled by fear now buzzed with innovation. Employees previously sidelined were leading breakthrough projects. The toxic culture Paul and his friends had fostered was being replaced by something genuinely collaborative. The Thompson account sent this over, Mercy said, placing a bottle of champagne on my desk. They're impressed with the new project proposals. Jennifer's. They'd been struggling with for years. I thought about all the times Paul had dismissed Jennifer's ideas, mocked her suggestions, made her doubt her brilliance. Now, she was leading our most profitable division. Any recent contact attempts? I asked. Paul tried to reach out through LinkedIn last week. His profile still lists him as our former VP of Operations, though anyone who searches his name gets quite a different story. The internet never forgets. Every article about workplace harassment. Every expose on corporate fraud. Every cautionary tale about abuse of power. Their names appeared in all of them. The documentary crew is requesting another interview, Mercy added. They're calling it Glass Ceiling Shattered. The focus is on corporate transformation and women in leadership. I shook my head. Direct them to our successful division heads instead. Jennifer, Maria, Sophia, the ones doing the real work of rebuilding. My phone buzzed, a message from Paul's mother. Since her public apology, she'd become an unlikely ally in corporate culture reform, speaking about the dangers of enabling toxic behavior. I had anonymously funded her speaking tour. The board meeting is in 10 minutes, Mercy reminded me. They want to discuss international expansion. I gathered my materials, pausing at the office door. The nameplate read simply, Isaac Shin. No more shadows, no more masks, no more pretense. It's been exactly 6 months, Mercy noted, falling into step beside me. Any regrets? She asked. I didn't answer. I'd made my choice long ago, and there was no turning back now. I thought about Paul's final words to me in the boardroom, his last attempt at manipulation. I really did love you, you know, he had said. No, I replied, striding toward the conference room. No regrets, just lessons learned. These lessons weren't just about revenge. They were about understanding power, responsibility, and the obligation to wield both wisely. They were about creating something better from the ashes of destruction. As we walked, Sarah reported, the employee mentorship program has a waiting list. Turns out people are eager to learn when they're not afraid of being mocked. That was the real victory. Not just the fall of Paul and his friends, but the rise of everyone they had tried to suppress. Every promotion, every implemented idea, and every positive change became a testament to what could flourish when the poison was removed from the soil. One last thing, Sarah added as we reached the boardroom. HR reported 0 harassment complaints this quarter. For the first time in company history, I paused, letting her words sink in. The human cost of Paul's toxic leadership had been immeasurable, but now, the healing was both measurable and tangible. Inside the boardroom, the members were already seated. These meetings were different now, collaborative and focused on long-term growth rather than short-term profits. The fear of speaking up had been replaced by a shared excitement about the possibilities ahead. "Shall we begin?" I asked, taking my seat at the head of the table. The weight of responsibility and the lightness of vindication balanced within me. The best revenge isn't about destroying what was wrong. It's about building something better in its place. As I looked around at what Reynolds Technologies had become, I realized the true victory wasn't in Paul's downfall, but in the rise of everyone else. "Let's talk about the future," I said, opening my folder. Because, in the end, that's what remains after revenge. Not the satisfaction of destruction, but the responsibility of creation. And I was ready for both.